It's funny. We totally take it for granted that the stories we read are about people like us, regular people dealing with recognizable problems in a world that looks, well, a lot like our own. But that kind of storytelling, what we call realism, it had to be invented. So today, we're going to explore how two absolutely revolutionary books didn't just tell new kinds of stories, they actually created a whole new way of seeing reality itself.
Okay, so look at this, because this really shows you the massive shift we're talking about. For centuries, the big stories were romances. We're talking tales of knights and kings, all built on this idea of divine truth and told in really fancy, lofty language. But the novel was a complete rebellion. It swapped kings for ordinary people, magical events for the stuff of real life, and that single divine truth for a messy world of personal relative truths. Big difference, right?
So the big question is, how did we get from dragons to diaries? Well, this didn't just happen in a vacuum. The novel was born from this perfect storm of social, philosophical, and technological revolutions that completely rewired how people saw themselves and their place in the world. First things first, you had a brand new audience. The middle class, we're talking merchants, professionals, they suddenly had money, they had some free time, and they were hungry for entertainment. But see, they weren't all that interested in epics about chivalry. What were they interested in? Money, property, social status. They wanted to read about people who looked and sounded just like them, facing problems they could actually recognize.
Now, what's really interesting is the change that was happening inside people's heads. You had these new philosophies and religious ideas that were putting a massive emphasis on the individual. Protestantism was all about having a direct, personal relationship with God, which led to all this intense self-reflection. And at the same time, you had empiricism saying, hey, real knowledge comes from what you can personally see, touch, and measure. All of a sudden, the most important journey wasn't out in the world, it was the one happening inside your own mind.
And here we go. This is the final piece of the puzzle: technology. The printing press. It made books cheap and plentiful. And for the very first time, authors could write for a public market, not just some single rich patron. This created the perfect engine to get these new, individual-focused stories into the hands of those new, middle-class readers who were absolutely desperate for them.
All right, let's see how this all came to life. We're going to start with our first case study. This is The Great Anti-Romance, the book that basically tore down the old world by showing what happens when someone takes its stories way too seriously. So, meet Alonso Quijano. He's this middle-aged guy who has read so many books of chivalry that his brain is just saturated. He gets so convinced that they're real that he decides to become a knight-errant himself. He renames himself Don Quixote and rides out to fix the world according to the rules he found in his books. And his madness, it isn't passive at all. It's a creative act. He looks at the boring, mundane world around him and just slaps a romantic narrative right on top of it. His beat-up old horse? Nope, that's Rocinante, his noble steed. A local farm girl he's barely even met? In his mind, she's the beautiful Lady Dulcinea. And a dusty old roadside inn? Oh, that's obviously an enchanted castle.
And this brings us to that famous scene, the one that just perfectly captures the birth of the novel. See, an old epic hero would see a monster and fight a real monster. Don Quixote, he sees 30 wicked giants and charges. But the world, this new novelistic world, it pushes back hard. They aren't giants, they're just windmills. And for the first time in literature, the real conflict isn't between a man and a monster, it's between a person's mind and cold, hard reality.
And here it is, the absolute key. After he gets knocked flat on his back, he doesn't have a moment of clarity. He doesn't say, oh, oops, my bad. No way. He doubles down. He claims some evil enchanter must have magically turned the giants into windmills just to steal his glory. He builds this perfect, airtight, internal logic that completely shields his fantasy from the inconvenient facts of reality. Okay, so if Don Quixote showed us a mind at war with reality, our next book gives us a mind that is absolutely determined to master it. Let's move on to the novel that really provided the blueprint for the modern individual, building a whole new world out of facts, figures, and just sheer force of will.
This is Robinson Crusoe. His story starts with an act of rebellion that basically defines the modern hero. His father begs him, "Son, just choose the middle way, a safe, stable, middle-class life." But Crusoe? He's driven by this ambition to go to sea and make his own fortune on his own terms. This rejection of the traditional path is his original sin, and it's what powers the whole story. So when he's shipwrecked, totally alone,
His reaction is the exact polar opposite of Quixote's. He doesn't invent fantasies to cope, he analyzes his reality. He literally draws a line down a page and makes a pro and con list about his situation. He turns his despair into an accounting problem, something that can be managed and eventually solved.
His whole mindset is about control. The first things he does are salvage every useful item from the shipwreck: tools, food, guns, you name it. He starts a detailed journal to keep track of time and his thoughts. He makes lists for everything. For him, the world isn't some enchanted place that needs interpreting. It's a collection of resources to be measured, cataloged, and used.
And for 15 years, he is the absolute king of this island, a world he built for one. Then one day, a single human footprint appears in the sand, and his reaction isn't joy, it's terror. Why? Because for the very first time, here is proof that he is not in total control. It's a direct threat to the perfect sovereignty he's built.
And when he finally does encounter another person, a native man he saves and names Friday, their whole relationship becomes a kind of model for colonialism. Crusoe doesn't ask his name, he gives him one. He doesn't learn his language, he teaches him to say master. And he systematically replaces Friday's own spiritual beliefs with his. He doesn't find a companion, he creates a subject.
So what happens when you put these two revolutionary stories side by side? You start to see the two main paths that the modern novel, and honestly, in a lot of ways, the modern world, would end up taking. One path is all about questioning reality, and the other is all about mastering it.
This slide just captures the two poles of our modern consciousness perfectly. On one side, you've got Don Quixote, a hero obsessed with old stories who fails to impose them on the world, but in doing so opens up this huge debate about what's real versus what we just perceive. And on the other side, Robinson Crusoe, a hero obsessed with facts, who, by mastering reality, gives us a blueprint for realism, for capitalism, and even for colonialism.
And that leaves us with a really fundamental question for right now. Is our world more like Quixote's, a total battleground of competing stories, where your personal truth is all that matters? Or have we actually built Crusoe's world, a system that is relentlessly driven by data, by efficiency, and by control? Maybe the true legacy of the novel is that struggle itself, that constant, dizzying negotiation between the stories we tell ourselves and the reality we're always trying to master.